Information economy has arrived. The world is teeming with innovation as new business models reinvent every industry. Inside Analysis is your source of information and insight about how to make the most of this exciting new era. Learn more at InsideAnalysis.com.
InsideAnalysis.com.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Yes, indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future. Your host here, Eric Kavanaugh, for the only coast-to-coast radio show that's all about the information economy, Inside Analysis. And folks, I am so excited today to have my old buddy online here. We have Wyatt Cash, Senior Vice President for Scoop Media Group. They publish a publication called FedScoop. We're going to find out what the feds are doing in the space of AI and automation and all this wonderful technology we've been talking about. And I've got my good buddy Eugene Burke of Digital Strategies Group riding shotgun, so he'll have some questions for us as well. But you folks know who listen to the show, we talk about AI all the time. We've been talking about Gen AI for like the last 6 months, ever since ChatGPT came out and roiled the market. I mean, just shook it to its foundation. And now every other vendor has a Gen AI product or a Gen AI strategy. Almost every database company has a vector database to be able to publish your embeddings, which are like your anchors of truth or your moorings for large language models, so they don't hallucinate, just make stuff up. Because as the folks at ChatGPT will tell you, the hallucinations are more of a feature than a bug. So that's what they're designed to do. But if you want to be responsible in using this stuff outside of just creative writing and some interesting things that are not regulated, for example, well, then you have to be a bit more cautious about that. That's where embeddings come in. But with that short intro, Wyatt Cash, welcome to the show. So nice to see you, buddy. What do you guys see? Tell us a bit about FedScoop and your work over there and what you see happening in the government vis-a-vis artificial intelligence.
Well, fantastic to be with you, Eric. Thank you. FedScoop is part of Scoop News Group, and we cover primarily the public sector IT space. We have events and news publications for the federal CIOs, CTOs, Chief Information Security Officers, all of those people that essentially support the federal government. We also support the state and local government, CIO community, and also the critical infrastructure industry, among others. And needless to say, the federal government has been really totally engaged, if you will, with what to do about this emergence of generative AI. But keep in mind, AI is nothing new for them. The Defense Department's been and DARPA have been working with AI for a long time. I mean, you think about driverless automobiles. A lot of that came from the days when DARPA had these challenges to say, can you drive vehicles through urban areas without drivers unassisted? And we've watched this happen for a long time, but clearly ChatGPT kind of exploded on the scene with a level of capability that put AI into the hands of users. It was primarily a back office kind of system, a way of managing huge volumes of data. And now suddenly you had the ability to chat with it. And it was very exciting. We've been using it at FedScoop. We've been following the federal government on how it's trying to keep ahead of it. And clearly what we're seeing is kind of, a couple of major things. Number one, what's the government's role in trying to provide guardrails around the use of AI in the larger community? Number two, how do we use generative AI to really accelerate what the government likes to call mission, but it's really the public service work they do. Everything from serving VAs, the veterans. How does the Veterans Administration help the community get a hold of its benefits faster? How do we do law enforcement more efficiently? Lots of casework. How do we accelerate the use of the Weather Service and labor, and also the Department of Energy with its research at national labs? And so the big news, obviously, we've heard recently, on October 30th, the White House issued a long-awaited AI executive order, things like 20,000 pages. I needed AI just to digest what the heck was in this thing. But briefly, it was a very comprehensive document to outline all the areas of risk and then all the areas of opportunity. And I can go on a little further on that. But then there's a number of other activities going on which we can elaborate. One of which is a use case inventory. The government actually asked agencies to catalog what are they using AI for, and then what are the use cases. And that catalog is now 700 items deep. FedScoop's covered a lot of it, and I can go into more detail in a minute. But just a summary of all the different ways that agencies are trying to use generative AI. It's every day there's another breaking kind of story on how that's being used. And the ability to keep track of it has become a story in and of itself. The incompleteness of these inventories, how quickly agencies are getting on board. So a lot going on in the space, and it's an exciting time to be covering the federal government, because behind the scenes for what we read in the daily newspapers, a lot of activity going on at the federal level for supporting the public at large.
Yeah. Now that's a good intro, and I thought for sure you'd bring up this executive order, and I'm glad you did. It is, as you suggest, comprehensive, and these things are, in terms of regulations, are nothing new. Or I go back to Sarbanes-Oxley, and if you remember back when we had that scandal with Enron, and it wasn't the energy people, it's the energy traders really that got people into a lot of trouble there. But what we saw spin out of that through Sarbanes-Oxley was this mandate to document your processes, document your controls, be able to speak to these things. And I think that's kind of what we're going to be looking for from the AI world, is to document your processes, document your protocols, what are the control points, how are you managing that, who's doing all that stuff. But it's so deep and so complex, and I don't care what anyone says, it's very difficult to ascertain whether Gen AI created this thing or a human being created this thing. And I don't know if it's even going to be possible or if it's even worth trying. So we are at a very interesting crossroads now vis-a-vis regulation, because although we can ask these folks to document the processes, again, the control points, all that stuff, that's fine. But, I'm reminded of a quote from DM radio from a long time ago. I had a guy, his name was Chuck Nice from the Insurance Institutes of America. And he said something that cracked me up. He said, if an insurance company wants to hide something, you're not going to find it. And you think about what these AI things are doing, it's like, good luck. I actually have a thread going with Jürgen Schmidhuber, who's the guy who wrote the papers back in the 1990s for the Transformers. And that technology, which has just now come to fruition, is what opened the door to these large language models. So this stuff is not new. I mean, he wrote those papers in the 90s, and here they are finally coming to fruition. And the people I talk to on the AI safety side say, explainability is out the window. There's no way you're going to explain this stuff. So it's like, how do you manage in a nebulous world what those components are going to be? I don't know. What are your thoughts, Wyatt?
Yeah, well, I think, clearly the emergence of cloud computing, the ability to handle so much more volume, has accelerated this into a new era altogether, number one. Number two, the big concern at the government level is that, the nation state adversaries are using this technology, and they don't have guardrails to worry about the way the government does, which has a lot of regulations on how to make sure their security systems are intact. So to me, it reminds me of the old Mad Magazine series, Spy versus Spy, the white hat guy and the black hat guy. And every issue there was another, back and forth. And the government is really on point to that. I was speaking with a Microsoft executive just the other day, though, who gave me some encouraging news, which is that the AI capability now on the defensive side has giving agencies the ability to really have a strategic advantage against ransomware. What they're seeing is they can detect and respond to incursions into their systems so quickly that they can almost get to a point where they can isolate it, shut down that access, actually cause the adversary to go on keyboard, as they call it, as opposed to just deploy the bots, and be able to intercept before they can do the damage. Now, this is clearly, a work in progress. And we know the adversaries are always finding new lines of attack. But what AI is now capable of doing at a pretty significant scale is be able to really get out in front because of its speed and its accuracy. The big difference now is that AI, even compared to a year ago, was not as able to be as accurate, to be able to pinpoint things the way it can now. And that's going to continue to accelerate. So we're on the cusp of being able to be more defensive in real time. And then what the government really isn't telling you much about is how offensive it can be, which is another part of the cloak and dagger activity that we're hearing about, can't always report on, but it gives the ability to government to really understand some of these nation state activities, what they're doing, to the point where they can even ask ChatGPT questions. If they have the right data in the system, who are these people and what exploits are they most successful with recently? How
Right.
can we attack it back? And how can we see the signatures in real time? These are all developments that AI is now giving that even a year ago we couldn't. And again, I attribute that back to the power of scale and speed.
Yeah, that's very interesting stuff, and you're bringing up a number of really good points here. One of which is ransomware. I mean, let's be honest, it's a real problem, and it's not just from outside the United States. There are people inside doing that stuff too. But the state actors are very concerning, and just not to get too off topic here, but if you step back and look at the sequence of events we've gone through in the last number of years, last 2 to 3 years, the Colonial Pipeline hack shut down the distribution of gasoline all along the eastern seaboard. At the time, I thought to myself, that's a state actor. Now, when you look at what's happening with Ukraine and other places around the world, it's like, that was probably an act of war. And, I remember you and I were at an event, I think in Dubai, a number of years ago with Richard Kirby, and I was talking to the gentleman who ran the NATO operations, I think, in Germany. And he said the biggest challenge that they had at that time, this is like 5 years ago now, 6 years, he said, is knowing what constitutes an act of war. And he was talking about the bots and all these bots that spin up. And I've played around with these things, and they're very strange and they're very sophisticated. But and it's not just from Russia. I think it's from all over the place. But these bots will spin up online, especially in Twitter. They're all over Twitter. And the way you get them to act is just respond to some big politician's comment on something and question anything, whether it's this side or that side, it doesn't matter. Just respond and see all these people start piling on. And they do two things. One, they insult you and try to make you feel bad. They're trying to basically deteriorate your morale and get you back on your feet. But the other thing they started doing, which I thought was very interesting, is citing real facts about things, like from some repository. And you look at these Twitter handles, it's like, all right, you get this guy with 9 followers and he's following 37 people, and he's very in tune with what's happening, and he's got all this data behind him. I'm like, that sounds to me like an AI bot that has been connected to a repository of information. We'll bring Eugene here in just 1 minute. Yeah. He knows about how these things are set up, but that's pretty creepy stuff. And I want my government to be in there monitoring these folks, and I want more action on that front. Real quick, Wyatt, what do you think about that, and just how it permeates our society these days, those kinds of things? What do you think about that, Wyatt?
Well, it's the floodgates have opened. We are in a new era. The thing that really is in discussion now with the CIOs we speak with is that the pace of technology has always been picking up faster and faster, but we are at a point where we are having a hockey stick change in the speed at which we need to be thinking about it.
Wow.
And we really need to think strategically in different ways and at a much faster space. And we're going to almost need AI to help us do that. I'd be remiss in not mentioning, though, that we have the security concerns, but we also have the opportunities for better public service. You mentioned Dubai and the UAE. They recently released a brand new plan for, I think, going out to 2030, and all the different ways that that country, and is much less encumbered than we are in the United States, can actually accelerate the deployment of public services. We can get through airports faster. We can recover financial fraud faster. We can protect the public and respond more quickly, faster. So there's a huge amount of activity on that front, which we can elaborate on more. I would be remiss in not saying the United States government is trying to do a lot of things in that area, in the healthcare field, in the patent and trademark office, trying to process patents faster and also see where fraud can happen there. FEMA is working on it. The State Department is working on it, trying to deploy better responses in the 180 plus countries they serve. So there's a huge activity on the positive side, I would say, for delivering better service outcomes for the public, not only in the United States, but as we're seeing now in governments all over the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'll bring Eugene in, just we have a couple of minutes left in this first segment. That is a really good point, Wyatt, and thank you for turning us to a positive direction here, because you're right. And Eugene, when you couple a large language model or even a small language model, as we've talked about a medium language model, to a repository of trusted information like rules and regulations, that's where these things can really sing, right? Real quick, what do you think, Eugene?
Absolutely. And why I was making an important point that the accuracy and the speed are increasing at not an incremental rate, but an exponential rate. And so the capabilities are now, it's achieving things that we didn't have the imagination to anticipate. And so that would be my next question in the next segment for Wyatt. Is our imagination big enough? 9/11 was a failure of imagination. Are we, and is the executive order that was published, is its imagination framework rich enough and broad enough?
Yeah, we'll pick that up after the break. But I will say just a couple quick things. I was talking to a CTO. It was Pat, a guy from Boomi, a CTO at a company called Boomi, and he made one of the most incredible points when we were talking about machine learning on this show just about a month and a half ago. He said, from his perspective, the key characteristic or the key action we need to engage in now with respect to these large language models and AI and machine learning in general is learning. And his point was human learning. And so we as humans need to play with these technologies, and you have to play with it to understand it, to really kind of see where it goes and how it operates and what it does. And it takes some time to mess around and kind of kick the tires. But we need to educate ourselves more and deeper by using the technology, by playing with the technology, looking for the mistakes, looking for when it gets things right, and curating that. And that's a big deal. Folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
And take us to the future. Indeed, folks, your host here, Eric Kavanaugh, with two of my besties in the world. We've got Wyatt Cash, Senior VP for Scoop Media Group. They publish FedScoop. And Eugene Burke of Digital Strategies Group, working with me on a stealth project. We'll have to tune all of you into that at some point soon. But we're talking about AI and what the government is doing about it. And Wyatt, you made a good point to mention that there are lots of positive things that can be done. And the sort of lower hanging fruit with these technologies, especially the large language models, is customer service. And so what you want to be able to do is leverage the text generating components or capacity of these engines, but moored in the facts and the policies and the rules and regulations of your organization. So in this place, the government. Now, the amazing thing is that you can feed a 5,000 page document to one of these large language models and then just have a conversation with it about what's in there, which is like, what? I mean, that is just off the charts crazy. And it's weird, Wyatt, I'll throw it over to you first. It's weird when you think about how Google is kind of falling apart. I mean, traditional Google search Number one, it's overloaded with ads. And you know that when you search for something and you got to scroll down to page 2 or 3 before you finally see something that's not a Google ad. And I heard from a source I will not reveal, a very intelligent guy who's well connected, that even the organic search results that come up after those sponsored ads are not entirely organic anymore. They're playing around with in the background. Now, that's what I've heard. I obviously haven't verified that with Google, but I wouldn't be surprised. So all this is happening. We went through fake news issues in the last 5-10 years. Now we've got hallucinations for large language models. It's like, all right, where's the in between that's going to make sense? And I think it really is coupling these large language models with hard and fast rules and regulations. And that is just going to open the doors to amazing customer service where you can just have an interaction with the machine and get all kinds of information that's useful about which government programs you qualify for, which new programs are out there, what their characteristics are, what you have to do to get them. All this stuff, what used to be handled by painstakingly written, frequently asked questions that were never good enough, is now going to be handled dynamically by these engines. That is a super big deal. What do you think, Wyatt?
Well, I think the really fascinating thing going on right now is when you talk about the evolution of ChatGPT 4 and 5 after that. And then, of course, this weekend's news with Sam Altman coming and going and
Right.
ultimately leaving OpenAI and jumping over to Microsoft throws kind of an interesting dynamic into it. But clearly, there's a bit of an arms race on how this will be done. But the important point that's emerging is the ability to create your own GTP-like chat systems for your own organization. So, for example, you could take all the podcasts you've ever done, take the transcripts, throw them into the ChatGPT and say, tell me about the episode where I interviewed guest A, B, or C, and it will give you an immediate access to that. Think of all the enterprises that can affect. And then you think also about the ability to, how do we control that? How do we keep our content, Department of Defense, for example, how do we not let other people get access to that intelligence, but be able to fully access it? Share it with our allies. So the Department of Defense, for example, is working with NATO nations to create partner platforms to be able to share information, probe it, and try to get to real-time decision-making in much faster cycles. So that ability to custom build your own tools, and of course, OpenAI was discussing the opportunity to create the equivalent of, an app or a play, store where you could use ChatGPT-like tools and sell them. And of course, there's this huge business model that's on the verge of emerging. So hard to know exactly where that will go. But the bottom line is the ability to ingest huge amounts of information and make sense of it is a challenge that we are now at this inflection point as a society. We're creating so much data so fast, we can't even manage it anymore. So we need these tools just to make sense of it. And then we need the extra tools to go, how accurate is it? Is the information reliable? And this is some of the things that came out in the White House executive order, the Department of Commerce, among others, but also CISA and other agencies are really being charged with how do we make sure that this information is validated, and so there's an effort to really promote transparency. How did you get to this? If you can't reveal the algorithms for proprietary reasons, we need you at least to show us a method that we can see reliability into it, and that's going to be our big challenge.
Yeah, I think that's exactly correct. And I think Eugene and I have talked about this. I'll throw it over to you, Eugene. The embeddings process, that is your audit trail. So how you build out your embeddings, and just to help folks understand what I mean by that term, an embedding is a piece of information. To really personify it, it's a memory for these models. So these models are very complex, and they have, some of them have 2 billion vertices. It's just crazy what they can do, kind of like your brain. It's all these vertices. So this is deep learning in action. We've had it for a long time. We've had deep learning for 15, 20 years, possibly longer, but never before did you have the compute power so readily available and so relatively inexpensively, although I say that with a bit of a caveat because we don't really know, and I think that's another shoe that's going to drop at some point. But what I'm being told by really smart people is that, they can do things that used to take weeks, they can now do that in moments. And it used to take 50 grand, now it takes 20 cents. I mean, there are crazy, crazy dynamics at play here. But Eugene, I think in terms of the audit trail, that's going to be your embeddings, what you fed this model, every little thing you fed it, at which point you fed it, that whole process, that's your audit trail. What do you think, Eugene?
Yeah, I think the analogy that I would use is something that I did for banking. Did a large project for a bank because the Federal Reserve said, we don't want you to become the next Lehman Brothers. We need, for all the credit risk decisions that you're making, we need you to show us how you arrived at that credit risk information and how did you make the decision. You put a widget on a person's screen, and based on that widget, they said yes or no. How did you get from the golden source all the way to the screen? Show us all the hops. And so that's where the auditability of this is going to be crucial. The transparency and the auditability is really going to be the true test of, is this technology explainable so that if we release it in a regulated industry, we know that we can rely upon the results.
Yeah. And that's just, it's an open question. Wyatt, like, what are you seeing or what are you hearing from some of your sources about how they're going to handle this auditability, how they're going to handle explainability? Because like I say, the folks that I know who know a lot about it are saying that, you can monitor what you put in, but you can't really figure out how it gets its answer. Though there are some companies doing it. And what's interesting is there's this whole ecosystem building around this right now. It's happening right now. And there is a company I talked to last week, Kyndi, Kyndi, I think it's .com, where they're very clever in that they will show you not only the answer you're looking for, but then they'll allow you to drop down and see where it got all those bits. So basically you ask it, let's say it's an Apple iPhone, what's the warranty on this new iPhone? It'll think, give you a 1-paragraph answer. And then underneath that, it'll let you drop down, and it went out and grabbed 7 or 8 bodies of text. And then they had a decision-making process that said, okay, of these 7 or 8 things, I think this is the most appropriate. But the point is they then allow you to curate that. So as the product owner, for example, you can sit there and go, no, you got that one wrong. It's actually this. And that's the curation process. So we are going to see that. But like, what are you hearing, Wyatt, from the folks you talk to about how they're going to try to at least bridle this dragon that's flying into the sky?
Well, I can assure you there's a lot of people working on it. Start with NIST, the National Institutes of Science and Technology. They put together a pretty comprehensive framework on how initially to think about security concerns, but they're also looking at how to be able to provide best practices from industry, as well as some government folks looking in to, provide that auditability. I think the big challenge, though, is that we do have an arms race in the commercial markets. And so no matter what government does, they will always be behind. We've seen it time and time again with social media. They get some good marks for actually responding faster than normal around AI. I think part of it is the competition with China, wanting to make sure we don't fall behind, but also seeing how it would impact them with vast amounts of information and fraud and financial markets. So the stakes are really pretty massive for an economy of our size. And so you got a lot of people working on it, but I don't know that we're really very far along, candidly, in having the right controls. And I think the other dimension of this is the curation thing. You now not just have a bunch of data scientists doing the checking. All of us essentially are engaging with it. It's paying attention to us at a machine learning pace So the curation cycle is also spinning up way faster from a lot more distributed experts. And that's a really different thing than we've had with technology before. And so, how this is going to shake out, we might have to be back here in 3 months and see it's even much different than it is today.
That's such an interesting point. And I learned something a number of years ago on DM radio. It's where I learned half the things that I learned this show Inside Analysis and DM radio. But there's a guy who is a master, a PhD. He's one of the most respected people for machine learning and for training models. And what he said to me was very interesting. So many of you may have heard of this whole thing about the muffin or the dog's face or something, and you can just go online and search for the meme. But some of these earlier algorithms had difficulty telling the difference between a blueberry muffin and a dog's face, right? It's just something about the contours and the shapes and the colors threw it off. And this is an issue also in the driving of cars. One of the early issues was when it was raining, the water, the light, the way it refracts off the water was throwing off the algorithm. So there are things that throw these things off and they don't work so well. But what he told me that was very interesting, he said, very, very few people are good at doing that process. So in other words, they're shown a picture of a dog and a muffin. They're supposed to hit muffin every time. He said 2% of people do that job well. 2%, 98% do not do it well. If you have someone who doesn't do it well doing it, it's not going to get done well. And then you're not going to get good results. So there is something to be said for the accuracy. And Eugene, I'll throw it over to you. Also, what I was told was when you get those annoying captchas that say, oh, click every picture that has a motorcycle in it, you're actually training a model that's being run by Google to be able to help the whole automated car industry. You're actually training the model to help it understand what people see and what people don't see. But nonetheless, those cars still do run over people. In San Francisco, a bus ran out of power. I guess an electric bus ran out of power and ran over a bunch of cars or something. Bad things are happening out there. But Eugene, I'll throw it over to you. This is still a work in progress, right?
It is. It is. And we're letting it train itself on us. And so Wyatt, one of the questions I had before the first break, do you feel that the executive order is rich enough and deep enough in its imagination in terms of the ethical controls, the accuracy controls? This is going to have impact on our basic civil rights. Now, the example about Twitter is interesting because people, if you think about the whole country as a system of ingesting information, making decisions, voting, policy implementation, and then how that plays out in the public world, there are a lot of safeguards that we ourselves exercise. Is our government casting the right net for the ethical controls of this?
It's a great question. And the surprising answer is I think that they are, but the challenge is their inability to execute on that imagination. And what I mean by that is, I think their government is very good at getting the smartest people in the room. And I looked at this executive order, all 100 pages, and I would say they have not left any stone unturned on the potential implications on workforce, security, economics, financial, healthcare, you name it. But the problem typically is they don't really have the real funding agility to really then go support additional follow-up. A good example is back in the Trump administration, believe it or not, they issued an executive order saying, let's start cataloging AI use cases. And 3 years later, they still only have about 700 in the portal. It's pretty decently documented, but most people are suspecting that there's a lot of activity that's not being documented. It's not complete. It's not being updated. And so what happens is policy ends up falling behind. So even with imagination, we can't really stay on top of it very effectively, or we'll look back 2 or 3 or 4 years later and go, we just couldn't keep up.
Yeah, well, folks, we'll pick that up after the break. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, welcome back to a Rock'em Sock'em content-packed show, man. This is so much fun with my buddy Wyatt Cash, Senior Vice President of Scoop Media Group. They publish FedScoop, and Eugene Burke of Digital Strategies. And we're talking about what's so amazing is that everything is being disrupted. And the pace of disruption is increasing. And what I'm looking at here that I think is very interesting is that we're not just seeing changes on the surface level. What these companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and Google, of course, with Bard can do is they can insert innovations lower in the stack to optimize what comes out on the other side. And we don't know exactly what we're doing, and I'm not sure what authority the government has to look into it or to make them reveal what they're doing. But when you think about something like data warehousing, which is a very expensive discipline, takes a whole lot of time and energy to move data around, to cleanse it, to load it into schemas and all this stuff. It's very expensive, but you get good answers from it at the end of the day if you've done it correctly. Well, what's to stop some of these models from being able to short circuit that entire painful process and just get right to the nut of what you're trying to find? And I think that they are in the crosshairs. And I think that's why Ali Ghodsi of Databricks went and spent $1.3 billion on Mosaic ML, while the folks at Snowflake and Teradata were joking about Gen AI like it was some silly fad. And they quickly changed their tune, by the way. Within like 3 weeks, both of those companies were like, oh, no, we have our Gen AI strategy. Everyone now has their Gen AI strategy. My point being, Wyatt, what's not in the crosshairs here? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you make some really good points. Essentially what you've got is the ability to automate now with such intelligence,
Right.
and the need to rely on that automation that we really just have to buckle up and go for the ride and do our best to really have a continual dedication to the tools to tell us what's going on. An agency I will give high marks to is CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They're the folks that famously Trump fired Chris Krebs when he came out and said the election security processes were actually very well intact. And they have some really great engineers and folks paying attention to cybersecurity things. And that art is really about monitoring, detecting, and so forth, which is different than what AI does, but it has a lot of the same disciplines. And so I'm hopeful that there is a report that they've put out, a framework. I can send it along in the show notes for you, but they're continuing to guide a lot of organizations in the government. And that model is then being copied widely by cybersecurity specialists in the commercial markets on, how to make sure AI is being used responsibly. You have AI assurance in your systems that you're protecting the critical infrastructure, which is a really scary place when you start to think about AI bots starting to take over utilities. And then just collaborating with our international partners, like what's the process to do that? So a lot's being focused on. The good news is a lot of good brain trust. Again, the issue will be, can we move fast enough?
Yeah, those are all excellent points. And Eugene, I'm always thinking about the manual override. Like, at what point do you bring in the manual override? Shut this thing down. Hold on, folks. It's difficult to do, but I think it's mostly going to be on the curation side, right? So you're going to have things get automated as much as can happen reasonably. And then when someone complains, then you're going to have a process for remediation to go roll back in time, say, okay, what happened here? What happened there? You're starting to see that in Bard and some of these other technologies too, and probably in ChatGPT, because they recognize we need an audit trail. We need to be able to see what happened when, and that all that stuff seems to be getting baked in. What are your thoughts, Eugene?
Have you ever discovered that your bank made an error? And were you ever able to prove that your bank misapplied funds? And it's happened in my whole life twice, where I was able to show nah, that's the wrong account. You did the wrong thing. But you have to be up to the minute on what the real state of affairs is. So the challenge for our society as we adopt these tools is if we essentially cut the moorings, cut the anchor and let this thing float, then we are at the mercy of what these things do.
Right.
If the society does a decent job in maintaining grounding to real reality as opposed to virtual reality, then we're okay. But that is an assumption that the education stays reasonably okay. People can still have faculties of critical reasoning, et cetera, et cetera. That's what's going to keep us more to real reality.
Yeah. Well, and I keep thinking about turning these large language models, connecting one, I've mentioned it to you, Wyatt, to the Federal Register. And I think this is going to be a new era of information absorption, if you will, interacting with these large language models as if they are your on-the-beat reporter, because they can answer any question you have. And they have the capacity to get down to the details that no human being has the memory to be able to do. So these are very powerful technologies that are going to radically transform how we interact with these systems and what these systems do. And, what did someone say to me? They were a little bit worried that AI is a little bit too strict on how it enforces things. Like if you let the engine decide stuff, like it's going to be like, nope, you don't get your money. Sorry. Wait, but it's my money. I don't know, Wyatt. Final thoughts from you. Go ahead,
so,
Eugene.
Eric, the other thing is in the media space, with the right embeddings, these models will be able to exercise reasonable inference based on what you have trained it is important to you.
Right.
Really, really potentially cool. Go ahead, Wyatt.
Some
and
thoughts from
I'll give
you.
you
Go
a
ahead.
good practical example where this is going to make a big difference, though. Think of the average veteran trying to figure out how to get their benefits squared away. Now,
Right.
pretend that they only speak Spanish right now.
Right.
The ability to find the right place on the website is a chronic problem for all of government. Which agency do you go to? Where on the web page? Now, AI has that ability, and I've seen it demonstrated just last week to do a question prompting going, I'm looking for X. And the ability to know exactly where in the system across all the Veterans Administration, the right information is there, and detect sentiment. Know that this person speaks Spanish. Oh, would you like the answers in Spanish? Here they are. Here's the links. I see you're trying to fill out this particular form.
Right.
Here's
Right.
the form. Oh,
Right.
and you want to process the form. I can help you actually process the form so you don't have to mail it in. All of these steps are very discombobulated all across government agencies. And the ability to have AI actually think intelligently like that is going to really be a supercharging effect to really improve government services at a scale that really is monumental. And it'll make mistakes, but I can guarantee you this. And one of the interesting things from a recent study that we just did is we polled 200 federal agency senior executives, both on the IT side and on the business side. And 71% of them agreed that the benefits outweigh the risks. Only 20% said the risks outweigh the benefits. And the ability to deliver better service, reduce costs, and save time were among the major issues or major benefits that they saw. And the big hang time problem will be training. There's a lot of people, from the executives on top on how to deploy it and strategize it, and the people on the front lines on how to kind of code these things to deliver it. So, but I'm convinced AI is going to help them in all of those cases.
Yeah, and what you're kind of talking about is the co-pilot here. So what people who are not developers may not know is that Microsoft is doing this. Just about every, I mean, there are probably 200 software vendors, if not 500, who are working on that very thing right now. And remember, these engines are predictive engines. They are designed to predict the next word or the next series of words based upon the prompt you've given it. But to Wyatt's point, done correctly, these engines will do wonders to shepherd people along what are Byzantine processes. And that's not a problem if you have to. It's just like when you go to the Home Depot and you want to find some product. If someone says, oh, it's way in the back, good luck. Well, that's not very helpful. But if they walk with you, no, come with me, I'll show you. And they walk you all the way back there and they point to it. That's what these things can do for you. That's a really, really seriously big deal. It's going to improve morale of people using the systems. It's going to improve overall use of the systems in terms of how many people do that. And that's going to result in people getting what they're wanting to get, which is just wonderful stuff. Instead of going on a phone line where you're talking to someone, okay, let me look up your account, blah, 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 taking forever and a day. No, that is not the future. That's not how these things are going to be working. But folks, we've been talking to Wyatt Cash and Eugene Burke. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.